To pay for your seat in the house, squire, to pay the feed of your game. You made him a poacher yourself, squire, you'd give neither work than meat. And your barley-fed Hedge of the garden at our starving children's feet. We lay in a burning fever on the mud of the cold clay floor, till you parted us all for months, squire, at the cursed workhouse door. There's blood on your new foreign shrubs, squire, there's blood on your pointer's feet. There's blood on the game you sell, squire, there's blood on the game you eat. You've sold the labouring man, squire, body and soul to shame. To pay for your seat in the house, squire, to pay the feed of your game.
I don't think landowners really care about the countryside. They only care about it so long as it's profitable. If it ceased to become profitable, they would lose all interest in it. I've never made any money out of it, but it means more to me, I'm sure, than those who make vast sums of money from it. They extract anything and everything that can be turned into money. That's why you've got no banks and hedges, and why trees are being cut down everywhere, and the landscape is being turned into a desert, really. Just a barren space with nothing. Because they want more and more. I think landowners, big landowners, can do just as they like, because the majority of them decide where things are going to go anyhow, and they do it to their advantage. And poaching goes back to your landowners. It's the landowners who control the countryside, the big landowners. They decide what's going to be and what's not going to be. Nobody else. They make the laws. Well, because until you fence a piece of land off and say it belongs to me, when you've done that, then you get poachers.
Well, again, I think the poacher certainly has been going as long as civilization has been going. And in the early historical times, when all the forests belonged to the king, anybody who poached without anybody who chased game without a royal warrant was, of course, a poacher. As game rearing and shooting became more intensive, of course, the poacher became more of a felon. And during the 19th century, when shooting, certainly in East Anglia, became perhaps the most popular pastime, the poacher found himself under the greatest pressure. And he, in turn, went poaching partly for sport, but very much during the difficult times and depressions, have something for the pot and to feed his family on. I mean, there were periods during the early 19th century when there's tremendous unemployment, and people simply couldn't even they'd get perhaps 3 days' work in the quarry to feed a wife and 5 or 6 children. And obviously there was a lot of resentment. And people were very, very hard pushed to make ends meet, and they poached to feed their families, literally. Historically, game laws were very, very severe indeed, dating from the time when all the forests belonged to the king. And you can see by this man trap here, which was in use up until the early part of the 19th century, this is the sort of horrific weapon that was used against the poacher until they were outlawed, I think in the 3rd decade of the 19th century. But deportation, death, was a common occurrence in the 19th and 18th century, early parts, for poaching offences.
Well, as you see, the programme is in full swing now. And we rear somewhere in the region of 3,500 birds here. 800 of those are partridges and the rest are pheasants. During the rearing programme, we lose a few buds. Some in the region of 10% pheasant, about 3% partridge. And I think that is general. The birds stay on the rearing field for 6 weeks, and after then we take them to the release pens, which are dotted about in various woods. Then we have to really keep an eye on them then for the sake of the poachers having to look around and wound out where they are. Well, we can't afford to lose any birds because, I mean, what with the cost on them, of course, around about £10 a bird by the time they are shot, and we hope to kill around about a couple of thousand a year, so I mean, therefore you understand the overall cost.
Of course, harvest, when the combines come out and the corn starts getting cut, then one can see just how the pheasant population and partridges are looking for the oncoming season. And of course, the gamekeeper does the same thing, so he can weigh up how he's got to have his partridge drives and which way he's got to drive his birds and where his wild stock are. So he's riding around doing the same thing as what you are. And it just so happens that riding around on a cycle at harvest time is also a convenient time to start getting your dog fit for the coming season, because that needs 4 or 5 weeks of trotting beside a boat 6 or 7 miles a day to get it turned up for October, when the hay coursing starts. Well, you start off, say, about the middle of August, about 2-3 miles a day, do that for about 2 weeks, and then for the next 2 weeks about 4 or 5 miles a day, and by the time you get to the end of September, you're doing 6 and maybe 8 miles a day with the dog, and by then it should be fairly fit and ready to go out and do a night's work. In some years you can even be surprised. You get a really wet spring and you think, oh dear, all the young partridges have got to be killed off and drowned by the wet spring, and yet you find harvest time you can find some really good coveys still. I think there's a combination of weather and chemicals used on whatever crop they happen to be living in at the time.
Well, I think that several things have happened. Farmers have increased field sizes. There aren't the same natural habitats that there used to be. Certainly in this particular area, it's a very heavy soil and therefore not the best partridges anyway. Of course, there's the argument of pesticides. But on the other hand, we're trying to counteract this by putting in broader shelter belts, areas of grassland where there are corners of hedgerows that have come out to increase the natural habitat for the partridge.
Once upon a time, there was probably 40 or 50 men worked on, most estates, and maybe more at harvest time. And so, consequently, with all the machinery they've got nowadays, and needing a lot less labour, I mean, 10 men today can do the work that they've needed 70 men to do 50 or 60 years ago. And I suppose with the advanced methods of agriculture, and more people being made unemployed through it, a lot of the locals did leave the villages for the simple reason they had to move to the towns to get work. They did create vacant cottages and that, which outsiders have now bought up. But at the same time, those locals would never have been able to afford to buy the cottages anyhow, or very, very few of them. And a lot of cottages, of course, came on the market because the man of the house had died or something had happened to him which made him unable to work anymore for his employer, and so therefore he had to get out, or his wife and family had to get out. Well, they've changed because there's hardly any locals left. There's very few people know what country life is about anymore. They've got this fairy tale image of the countryside, which is all roses and lovely and everything is nice in the country. And they don't realise, you know, that nature has got the other side as well. It's a hard life. It is for those that are locals and have had to make a living off the land in the best way they can. From August till September, that's like the never-ending wait, you know, just waiting to be able to go out. And the first night of the season is like the first night you ever went out and ever shot a pheasant. It's always the same. 6 weeks before the season you start, and you can't help it, you start looking for the coveys sitting on the fields, coveys of partridges, seeing how many pheasants, young pheasants there are about, weighing it all up, ready for October or September in the case of partridges. Seeing where everything lays. It's like after harvest, it's a new world. There's so much more to be seen and it's all new. Well, I think stubble burning is unnecessary, and there's far more wildlife gets killed by stubble burning than people realise. I've seen dead leverets and rabbits, young rabbits and partridges, game birds and all sorts scorched up for stubble burning. And of course a lot of farmers aren't too bothered about whether they burn the hedges down too. I suppose stubble burning came in when dairy farming stopped. That's when people really started burning the stubble off. When dairy farming in Norfolk started to come to an end.
I think we like to kill anything up to 100 to 150 a day. That gives everyone a shot. There's 10 guns, and we don't like to kill a lot of pheasants because we got 10 days shooting to get in, so that's killing somewhere around about the 100 mark. Just so that we kill about 1,000 a year. Some places you go to, they normally kill 1,000 a day. They don't expect to kill hundreds. Well, especially with our syndicate anyway, they aren't sort of the cream of the shots, but they all enjoy themselves, and that's what the day is about. Whether they kill 10 pheasants or whether they kill 1,000, they'd still be happy. There's a good deal of leg pulling go on the day. They're just businessmen that like to get out of the office for a day a week. They give them a bit of exercise, and they have a bit of sport. And provided they want the sport, then I shall keep a job.
So I think there's no denying that shooting is an extremely expensive sport. But I think the thing one's got to bear in mind is that all the money raised from letting shooting is recycled into the rural economy. It's giving employment. It's giving quite a number of people an enjoyable day out beating, and they all come and they love it. And I can produce plenty of people to prove that to you. So that it's not quite as straightforward, I think, as saying that it's a rich man's sport. There is a tail end to it that brings benefit to those that live and enjoy the countryside.
Well, I don't see, unless they're a very, very rich man now, how they can afford to to run a shoot with big numbers of pheasants anyway. I mean, a good shoot now at least needs at least 20,000 a year to run it, I take it. And you know, there ain't that many people with the money to spend 20,000 plus a year.
We were then saying, you know, it's a challenge. Bill just now said that he knows somebody who's been shooting and he's a 100%er, you know, and he gave the shooting up because there's no challenge left. I think that's really what it amounts to. It's a challenge with nature. Same as with farming. This is what country is all about.
Well, I think we like a day in the open. A day in the open. Especially the city types, they like a day in the open. Watch the dog work. If they get a bird or two now and again, they're very happy. They don't come out to kill everything. They come out to preserve what they can. If it weren't for the shooting men, there'd be no pheasants, very little, and anything.
You notice we've all left the low ones, pick the best ones, and meet a lot of new people. I mean, this is the first time I've been on the shoot and met a lot of new friends. You know, that's
very much a social gathering, a social event.
To me, there's nothing cruel about it. I mean, I don't see any difference between raising cattle to eat or raising anything to eat or raising these to shoot. I mean, as you've seen, everything that has been wounded has been picked up, so there's nothing left behind. That's in the butcher shop. That's helping the export trade. I mean, virtually every pheasant that we kill goes abroad anyway. And this has been going on for years and years and years, and I hope that never die out. I ain't going to say that rearing won't die out in time, because I think it will. And when that happens, a lot of the countryside, there won't be a pheasant left.
There won't be nothing else left.
No, there won't.
Simple reason I'll fell the woods, I'll bulldoze the hedges out.
I mean,
close.
To people who are unaware of the goings-on of the countryside and the tradition of field sports, pheasant shooting and so on, it may seem strange to equate game conservation with shooting. However, it's very interesting to note that game, of course, is at its most plentiful on the farms and estates where shooting takes place, because it is regarded as a crop there in the same way as other crops on the farm, and a proportion of the annual farm budget is put towards maintaining this crop.
I think that conservation and shooting go terribly much together. I'm not necessarily holding a candle for country sports, although I indulge in them myself. But one thing is absolutely certain, that without shooting in Norfolk or, say, hunting in the Midlands, the countryside would not be conserved the way it is. I'm actually keen on the visual landscape, but if I wasn't, and I was just keen on farming, and I wasn't interested in shooting, well, I could cut every tree down and have one huge wheat field. Might make a few extra bob. But, I mean, there's no doubt about it that country sports have shaped the landscape, particularly in East Anglia, which is entirely a man-made landscape. Obviously, the way the land, how heavy or light the land is, dictated the size of the fields in the past. But nowadays, it's very much the shooting interest, in fact, which is keeping the parts of Norfolk which are preserved as they are.
It's man's basic natural instinct to go out and hunt his food. I don't know of any other better feeling, and I think most people would admit the same. Really, if they're truthful, there is a hunting instinct in all of us. It's just in some of us it lays dormant, and in others it's active. And if that basic natural instinct is within you, then it has to come out. And when the weather is right and everything is right, then you have to go. And you're working with nature. You're working with the weather and the crops and everything, and the time of the year, the seasons, everything. Nature decides whether you go out and you have a good night, or whether you go out and you get nothing. You go out when there's a rain frost, you'll come home empty-handed. But you go out when the wind is blowing, starlit night, no moon, then the chances are you'll have a good night. You never know what's over the other side of the hedge until you get there. And when you get there, you never know what you're going to find.
If they're in it now, well, they are in it for the money. I mean, there's some of these money to be made out of it. With pheasants now at £3 a brace, if you can go and get 20 pheasants, I mean, that isn't a bad night's work. You're talking to 10 brace of pheasants, well, that's 30 quid. I mean, that's virtually my week's running wages.
But that's only partly money. I don't think that determines whether they go out or not. Not money alone. And if it was a case of just going out and earning money, there'd be a hell of a lot of people do it. But there's a lot of times you go out and you don't earn no money. And it's usually the times when you need it most. Well, you keep going, don't you? I mean, you might walk 4 or 5 miles and, you know, just not even get our bird, you know, not even have one shot. And then suddenly you might just drop into a little old pit hole that happened to lie warm, and the night can change, and suddenly you've got yourself a dozen birds, and home you go, quite happy. And not only that, that all belongs to you, you know. When you're out there, there's nobody else about it. There's nobody to tell you where to go and where you can't go. You can go where you like. You ain't got to walk around the road. You can walk straight across the fields. You can go as a crow fly.
Even if we own the land, as I'm a landowner, I consider myself to be a steward of the land for my lifetime. And the poacher quite probably going to take the view that nobody owns the land, God owns the land, and therefore he's going to have his share of it.
I'm now at the valley belt. I had a listen down here and I can't hear anything, so I'm now going to take... In the season, right early on, you've got to be out night watching, as we call it. We start off earlier on in September for partridges. We try and bush the stubbles up, pieces of barbed wire. We'll put out anything to stop the boys coming with dragging nets. Then we go on to the woods and the belts. I generally try and sit about in the van some nights if it's cold, or if it's very cold, then I'll get the old dog and we'll go out on foot. Anything to try and be in a different place, no, not be in the same place 2 nights running. Very often they'll come just as soon as the old birds get up. 5 o'clock tea time, when they expect you to be at having your tea. You can't really put a time down. Their wife never knows when I'm coming in for tea, put it like that. And then some of them will wait through and come through 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, might be 3, 4 o'clock in the morning even, and they'll be going home when all the early workers are going to work, so they aren't noticed. There's just no telling. You've virtually got to do all night and half the morning as well. In my career anyway, I have been done a time or two, obviously. And the next morning when you go through the wood, there's nothing will come to the whistle when you whistle your birds up. You get heaps of feathers here, there and everywhere, and you know, you really feel sick about it. If I had my way, I should put the bloody lot in jail, sort of thing, and you know, and throw away the key.
It usually turns into a personal thing between the local poacher and the gamekeeper. They usually hate each other's guts. The gamekeeper hates the poacher because he can't catch him, and the poacher finish up hating the gamekeeper for his devious deeds he's likely to do, you know. I.e. shoot his dog, poison it, snare it. I have seen a gamekeeper's gibbet with 3 whippet-type lurchers hanging on it. The carcasses of 3 whippet-type lurchers hanging on it, not far from here, in Norfolk. And what can the poacher do anyhow? Even if he knows the gamekeeper has shot his dog or poisoned his dog, what can he say? He can't say nothing. He can't take him to court.
Come on. Hey, good girl. Drop it. Good girl. There's a good girl.
I mean, years ago, when you had the old laws, I mean, if you had someone with a lurcher, then you simply stuck a dog spike in the hedge. When the hare went through, that went straight past, and when the lurcher went through, that had a dog spike go straight through its guts. And I mean, them days, that was as simple as that. If you walked on my land, you got your foot in a leg trap, in a man trap, and that was cut off, you didn't come anymore. You knew exactly where you were. You knew if the lord of the manor caught you on there and your father worked there, and you were caught, your father would be out on his ear straight that night.
It's the same as somebody keeping a running dog or a lurcher. It's just not done. If you live in a tied cottage, then you can't keep a lurcher. And I know of people who've been threatened with eviction today if they kept a lurcher, which is basically no different to the peasants years ago when they had a running dog, and the law stated that the dog had to have its 1 toe removed from each front foot. Because even the poor old farm labourer's got a few more rights today than he did have a few years ago. When you're home depends on your conduct and the fact that you may or may not be with a roof over your head or not. Then some people decide it's easier to work from dawn till dusk for somebody who's got far too much anyhow than to pursue their natural instincts. And there's no money got out of poaching anyhow. Real poachers never get rich, not from what they do. I've seen lots of people try to turn themselves into poachers, and it's impossible. They can't. They lack that something else that you can't put into words. That's just not there. They're like bulls in a china shop. They don't know how to walk through a wood quietly and never will do. The majority of people who move to villages today, they just put down the poacher's way of life as being wrong. It's wrong. It's wrong because it's illegal. It's wrong because you just shouldn't go out and shoot pheasants or game. You can't do that, just walk out across the field and shoot a brace of old birds. And they can't understand why you do it. I've seen these people with all this field to the countryside move to these little villages. They come here and they go to live off the land, and they get a goat and they put in a few cabbages and a few potatoes and that. And I've seen what they're living off the land is. I've never seen nothing like it, you know. It's pathetic, it really is. They're playing a game, you know, which to people who are born in Norfolk comes naturally. And they're just they're playing at living in the countryside. And you can't argue with them. They've got all the answers. They know everything. Can't tell them anything about anything because most of them had very good educations, and so consequently, I suppose that they think you know, they do know everything. But they don't know about the things that really matter. I don't think so.